I always thought my life with Emily was a perfect reflection. Two halves of a whole, polished and pristine. We'd been married for 12 years, living in a quiet suburb outside Seattle. Our home a cozy two-story with ivy creeping up the brick. I'm James, a structural engineer by trade, methodical, steady, the kind of man who finds comfort in blueprints and straight lines. Emily was the opposite, vibrant, a painter with a studio in our attic. Her canvases splashed with colors I couldn't name. She'd laugh at my orderly ways, tease me about my pressed shirts, and I loved her for it. Our daughter, Lily, was 8, a blend of us both. My brown eyes, her wild curls. Life felt solid, like a bridge I'd designed myself. It started with a phone call I wasn't meant to hear. I'd come home early from a site inspection. Rain had shut it down, and found Emily in the kitchen, her voice low, urgent. "No, not now," she whispered, her back to me as she gripped her phone. "He'll be home soon." I froze in the doorway, my boots still muddy, the air suddenly thick. She didn't see me, didn't hear the creak of the floorboard. "Tomorrow," she said softer, then hung up. When she turned, her face went pale, a canvas wiped clean. "James, you're early," she chirped. "Too bright, too quick." I asked who she was talking to. "Just Sarah," she said, waving it off. "Her best friend." Plausible. But her eyes darted to the side, a flicker I'd never seen before. That night I couldn't sleep. Her breathing beside me was steady, but mine wasn't. I kept replaying her voice. "Not now, he'll be home soon." It gnawed at me, a splinter under a nail. Sarah didn't need hushed tones. They'd gab for hours about gallery openings or Lily's school projects. This was different. I slipped out of bed, grabbed her phone from the nightstand. Passcode, Lily's birthday. I'd never checked it before. Trust was our foundation. But there, in the call log, no Sarah. Just a number, unlisted, dialed 3 times that week. My chest tightened. I didn't wake her. I just sat there, staring at the screen, the first crack forming in our perfect mirror. The next day, I pretended everything was fine. Kissed her goodbye, dropped Lily at school, went to work. But I called that number from my office, hands shaking. A man answered, deep voice, casual. "Yeah?" he said. I hung up, heart pounding. Who was he? I told myself it could be anything, a client, a gallery contact. Emily's art was her world. Maybe this was business. But business didn't whisper. Business didn't hide. I drove home that afternoon, mind spinning, and saw her car gone. She'd said she'd be painting all day. I called her. "Where are you?" I asked, casual as I could manage. "Oh, just grabbing supplies," she said, breezy. Too breezy. I heard traffic, a horn. She wasn't at the art store downtown. She was somewhere else. The crack widened. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I'm not a man who rushes into things. I analyze, I measure, I plan. So I watched. Emily came home that evening with a bag of brushes and paints, chatting about a new piece she was starting. "Abstract," she said, smiling, her hands fluttering like they did when she was excited. I nodded, smiled back, but my eyes were on her. Her hair was mussed, her cheeks flushed. Not the kind of flush from a quick errand. I asked about her day, probing gently. "Oh, you know, the usual," she said, avoiding my gaze. The usual didn't include secret calls or unexplained drives. I started tracking her. Not proud of it, but the splinter was deeper now, festering. I checked her phone when she showered. More calls to that number. Texts too. Deleted but recoverable with an app one found online. "Meet me at 2, one said. "Miss you," another. My stomach churned. I installed a GPS app on her phone, hidden in a system update. Next day, she said she was meeting Sarah for lunch. I watched the dot move. Not to Sarah's house, not to a cafe, but to a motel off the highway, 30 miles out. She stayed there 2 hours. When she came home, she smelled of lavender soap. Not hers. "Good lunch?" I asked, voice steady. "Great," she said, grinning. "Sarah's a riot." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I measured the distance between us growing. I called Sarah myself, fishing. "How was lunch yesterday?" I asked, casual. She paused. Lunch? Oh, we didn't. Emily canceled. Said she was swamped. The lie hit me like a beam collapsing. Emily wasn't swamped. She was at that motel. With him. Whoever he was. I dug deeper. Checked her bank statements. Small cash withdrawals, consistent, unexplained. Motel money? Gifts? I didn't know. But I saw him in my mind. Tall, maybe charming. Someone who made her whisper. I hated him already, but I hated her more for breaking us. That night I followed her. She said she was going to a gallery event. I waited 10 minutes, then drove after the GPS dot. Not a gallery, a house, a small ranch-style place in a wooded lot. I parked down the road, watched her car in the driveway. A man opened the door, broad shoulders, dark hair, a smile I could see from 50 yards. She hugged him, lingered too long. My hands gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles whitened. They went inside. I sat there, engine off, the night closing in, imagining her hands on him, her laugh for him. The mirror was shattering. His name was Daniel. I found out later, piecing it together like a blueprint gone wrong. I didn't storm the house that night. I drove home, mind racing, plotting. Next day I called in sick, told Emily I'd be late. She didn't blink, just kissed me and left to paint. I went back to that house, parked a block away, and waited. He came out mid-30s, fit, wearing a leather jacket. He drove off in a pickup and I followed. He stopped at a gym, then a coffee shop, laughing with the barista like he owned the world. I hated his ease, his confidence. Who was he to her? I ran his plates through a friend at the DMV, off the books, a favor. Daniel Reese, 34, no criminal record, a contractor by trade. Lived alone in that ranch house. I searched his name online, found a bare-bones social media profile, pictures of job sites, a dog, a few beers with buddies. Nothing about Emily. Smart, discreet, but not enough. I went to his gym, signed up for a trial, watched him lift weights, joking with a trainer. He was ordinary, unremarkable. Why him? What did he have that I didn't? Emily's behavior shifted. She was home more, but distant. Phone always close, smiles forced. I asked about her art, her day. She'd ramble, then trail off. I saw Daniel in every pause, every glance away. I checked the GPS again, more motel trips, his house twice a week. I bought a camera, small, hidden in a pen, planted it in her purse. The footage was grainy, but there, her voice, his, in a room I didn't recognize. You're my escape, she said, laughing. Escape from what? Me? Lily? Our life? My hands shook watching it. I confronted her that night, calm as I could manage. Who's Daniel? I asked, setting the trap. Her face froze, then softened. Daniel? Oh, he's a client. Bought a painting last month. I showed her the GPS log, the pen footage. She stammered, eyes wide. It's not what you think, she said, reaching for me. Pulled away. Then what is it? Silence. She cried, begged forgiveness, said it was a mistake. I didn't believe her. The man in the frame had taken her, and I'd take something back. I didn't leave her. Not yet. Leaving was too simple, too clean. She didn't deserve clean. I slept on the couch, told Lily Mommy and Daddy were just tired. Emily hovered, apologetic, promising change. I nodded, played along, but inside, I was drafting something crueler than divorce. Daniel wasn't just a fling. He was her rebellion, her escape. I'd make them both regret it. Revenge isn't impulsive for me. It's a structure, precise, load-bearing. I started building. First, I studied him more. Hired a PI, quiet guy, ex-cop, expensive but thorough. Detailed Daniel, dug into his life. Divorced 2 years ago, no kids, a reputation for charm. Worked freelance, renovating homes. Liked his whiskey, his women. The PI got photos, Daniel and Emily at the motel, her arm looped in his, laughing. Another of them at his house, her car parked overnight. I kept them in a locked drawer, fuel for the fire. I didn't show Emily, let her think I was softening. I leaned on my skills. Structures fail when their supports erode. I'd erode his. Called a contact at the city planning office, asked about Daniel's jobs. Found 2 permits pending approval. I knew the inspector owed me a favor from a bridge project. Delay them, I said. Find violations. He did minor stuff, but enough to stall Daniel's contracts. Money would tighten, he'd feel it. Next, I hacked his email basic phishing trick, a fake invoice. Got his passwords, his client list. Sent anonymous tips to his bigger jobs. Vague warnings about unreliable work. 2 canceled within a week. He'd scramble soon. Emily noticed my distance, tried harder. Dinners, touches I shrugged off. I asked about Daniel once, casual. It's over, she swore, eyes wet. I didn't care if it was true, I wasn't done. I planted doubts in her too. Left my laptop open. Fake messages from a colleague about a woman I'd met on site. Watched her peek, saw the jealousy flare. Good. Let her wonder. Let her feel the instability I'd felt. The plan was taking shape, beams locking into place. Daniel's life started crumbling. The PI reported back. Clients dropping, permits stalled. His truck repossessed after missed payments. I'd nudged the dominoes and they fell. I saw him once, outside his gym, arguing on his phone. Face red. Satisfaction bloomed in me, sharp and cold. But it wasn't enough. Emily was the core, the keystone. She'd betrayed me in a way I couldn't unsee. Her whispers, her escapes, her choosing him. She'd feel this too, deeper than he ever would. I escalated. Told her I was working late, but I followed her again. She went to his house, still seeing him despite her tears. I recorded it, her car pulling up, her slipping inside. Next day I showed her the clip. Over, huh? I said, voice flat. She broke down, sobbing. Said she tried to end it but couldn't. He gets me, she whispered. Like that explained it. Gets her. I didn't yell, I walked away. Let her stew. That night I mailed the footage to her parents, her sister, and signed. Let them see her shame. Her phone buzzed nonstop the next day, family furious. She begged me to fix it. I said nothing. I turned to Lily next. Not to hurt her, never her, but to shift the ground under Emily. Enrolled her in a summer camp 2 states away. Told Emily it was for her development. She protested, but I'd already paid. Arranged it with Lily's excitement as leverage. Mommy can visit, I said, knowing she couldn't. Her art, her guilt, her Daniel would keep her here. Lily left a week later, waving from the bus. Emily cried, alone. I felt the first collapse, her world tilting. Then I hit Daniel again. Used his email to send crude messages to his ex-wife. His boss from an old job, petty, but enough to stir trouble. His ex filed a restraining order. His reputation frayed more. I watched him at the coffee shop, unshaven, tense. Emily's escape was imploding, and she'd feel it soon. The structure was holding my revenge, my design. 5 parts down, 10 to go. It'd get worse. Emily's world was shrinking, and I made sure she felt every inch of it. After Lily left for camp, the house turned quiet. Too quiet, like the hush before a beam snaps. She'd wander the rooms, eyes red, trying to talk to me. James, please, she'd say, voice trembling. We can fix this. I'd nod, say nothing, let the silence press on her. I'd learned silence was a tool, heavier than shouting, sharper than accusations. She'd fill it with her own guilt, her own doubts, and I'd watch her unravel. Daniel was fraying too. The PI sent updates, his job's drying up, his truck gone, his gym membership canceled for unpaid dues. I chipped away at his foundation, but I wasn't done. I found his ex-wife's number online, called her from a burner phone. He's seeing someone married, I said, voice low, anonymous. Thought you should know. She cursed him, said she'd spread it around. Word travels fast in small circles, his buddies, his clients, they'd hear. I wanted him isolated, a pariah. Emily's escape would sour soon enough. I kept up the act with her. Cooked dinner, asked about her painting, played the husband she thought she still had. But I'd leave clues. Receipts for late-night drives I didn't explain. A woman's scarf in my car I'd bought just for her to find. Whose is this? She asked once, holding it up, voice tight. I shrugged. Must have left it at the office. Her jaw clenched. She didn't believe me, couldn't prove anything. I saw the paranoia creep in, the same kind she'd planted in me. Good. Let her wonder who I was with what I was doing. Let her feel the ground shift. One night, she broke. Came downstairs where I sat with my laptop, tears streaming. I ended it with him, she said, hands wringing. For real this time, I swear. I looked at her, calm, measured. Okay, I said, and went back to my screen. She stood there, waiting for more. Anger, relief, something. I gave her nothing. The next day, I checked the GPS. Her car stayed home. Maybe she meant it. Didn't matter. The plan was past forgiveness now, a structure too far along to dismantle. I'd make sure she'd never trust peace again. Emily's art was her soul. She always said her way of breathing, of being. I decided to take that too. She had a show coming up, a big one at a gallery downtown, her first solo in years. She'd been prepping for months, pouring herself into it. I'd watched her paint, oblivious to me, thinking it was her redemption. I let her believe it. The night before the opening, I called the gallery owner. Old friend of hers, pretentious guy named Marcus. She's been off, I said, voice concerned. Unstable. Might not handle the pressure. He hesitated, asked if she was okay. Just warning you, I said, left it vague. Opening night, I went with her. She wore a green dress, nervous but glowing, thinking this was her comeback. The crowd was decent, collectors, critics, her family still stiff from the video I'd sent. Marcus pulled her aside early, whispered something. Her face fell. Later, she told me he'd cut 3 pieces, said they felt rushed, unprofessional. A lie I'd planted. She smiled through it, but I saw the cracks, her confidence buckling. I mingled, played the proud husband, while she shrank beside me. Then I struck deeper. I'd hired a guy, sketchy type, cash only, to pose as a buyer. He approached her mid-event, loud enough for others to hear. Love your work, he said, grinning. Reminds me of Daniel Reese's stuff. Same vibe. Her eyes widened. A few heads turned. Don't know him, she stammered. The guy shrugged, walked off. Whispers started, her past, her lies, threading through the room. By the end, she was pale, clutching her wine glass, her triumph souring. I drove us home, silent, letting her stew in the ruin of her night. She didn't paint for days after. Said she felt exposed, like everyone knew. They don't. I lied, gentle. But they did, I'd made sure. Her art, her escape from the escape, was tainted now. Daniel's name hung over it, a shadow she couldn't shake. I'd turned her passion into a mirror of her shame, and she didn't even see my hand in it. The gallery of lies was mine, and it held her tight. Daniel was next. He'd lost enough. Money, work, pride. But I wanted him broken, not just bruised. I pulled strings I didn't know I had. Found his landlord through public records, a gruff old guy managing that ranch house. Sent an anonymous letter, photos from the PI, Daniel with Emily, timestamps. Your tenant's trouble, I wrote. Brings women here, married ones. A week later, eviction notice. Daniel fought it, but the landlord didn't budge. Reputation mattered more than rent. He was out by month's end, scrambling for a new place. I didn't stop. His ex-wife's gossip had spread. His buddies distanced, his charm fading. I used his email again, sent a job application to a rival contractor. Sloppy, arrogant, full of typos. They called him, laughed him off. He'd never trace it, but he'd feel the rejection. Then I went physical. Found his new apartment. Cheap, rundown, all he could afford. Paid a kid from the site, young and discreet, to slash his tires one night. Daniel woke to flat rubber. No cash to fix it. Small, petty cuts, but they bled him dry. Emily felt it too, even if she didn't know why. She'd call him. I'd see the number flash on her phone, unanswered. He's not okay, she said once, staring at the screen. He's struggling. I nodded, feigned concern. Rough patch, I said. She didn't know I was the storm. She'd try to comfort him, I knew, but he'd push her away. Too proud, too wrecked. I'd severed their tether without her seeing the knife. She'd blame herself and he'd blame her too. Perfect. I tightened the strings at home. Told her I was traveling for work, 3 days, a fake conference. Left my phone on, tracked her calls. She reached out to him twice, left voicemails I couldn't hear but could guess. When I returned, I asked about her days casual. Quiet, she said, eyes down. I smiled, said I'd missed her. She flinched, didn't believe it, didn't trust me. The puppet strings were taut, pulling them both where I wanted, apart, alone, dangling. Emily was a shell now, hollowed out, moving through our house like a ghost. She'd stopped painting, stopped smiling, barely ate. Lily was still at camp, and the silence between us grew thicker, a fog I cultivated. She'd sit at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, her phone dark. I don't know who I am anymore, she said one night, voice small. I looked at her, said, you'll figure it out. Cold, detached. She cried, and I let her. No comfort, no touch. I'd stripped her layers. Family, art, him, and left her bare. Daniel was worse. The PI tracked him to a dive bar, drinking alone, unshaven, a shadow of the man I'd seen. His apartment was a hole, leaky roof, peeling paint. He'd lost another job, botched a bid I'd sabotaged with a fake complaint. His dog was gone, given away, couldn't afford it. I'd taken everything he leaned on, piece by piece. He'd call Emily sometimes, late, drunk. I'd see the missed calls. She wouldn't answer anymore. Their bridge was ash and I'd lit the match. I played my part, steady James, the husband holding it together. Took her to dinner once, a test. She picked at her food, barely spoke. You seem distant, she said, searching my face. Work's tough. I lied, meeting her eyes. She nodded, unsure. I'd planted enough doubts. Scarves, late nights. That she couldn't trust me either. She'd lost her anchor in me, in him, in herself. The hollow shell cracked more each day, and I watched, patient, waiting for the next blow. I sent her a curveball. Mailed a letter, typed, no signature, addressed to her, postmarked from out of state. I know what you did, it read. So does he. She found it, panicked, showed me. Who sent this? She asked, trembling. I shrugged, played dumb. Old client, maybe? She didn't sleep that night. Kept checking the locks, the windows. Fear was her new companion, and I'd invited it in. The shell was brittle now, ready to shatter. The structure was complete. My revenge, a towering thing, precise and cruel. Daniel was a wreck, Emily a husk, and I stood over it all, the engineer of their ruin. But it wasn't enough to watch them crumble. I wanted them to see the architect. I started with him, left a package at his apartment, no return address, just a USB drive. On it, every photo, every email, every step I'd taken to dismantle him. A note. She was never worth it. He'd know someone had done this, not fate, not chance. He'd guess her, maybe me. Let him wonder. Emily's turn came next. I waited for a quiet night. Lily still gone, the house a tomb. Sat her down, calm, deliberate. I've known everything, I said, voice steady. Every call, every trip. I broke him. I broke you. Her eyes widened, mouth open, no sound. I laid it out, permits, tires, the gallery, her family. Showed her the PI's photos, the GPS logs. You thought you could escape, I said. This was your cage. She shook, sobbed, begged me to stop. I didn't. You chose him, I said. I chose this. She tried to leave, grabbed her keys, ran for the door. I planned for that. Car wouldn't start, battery drained, my doing. She came back, defeated, and I left instead. Checked into a hotel, let her sit in the wreckage. Next day, I filed for divorce, full custody of Lily. Her lawyer would fight, but I had evidence, years of it now. She'd lose everything, home, daughter, name. Daniel would too, his life a rubble pile I'd designed. I saw them once more, separately. Him at the bar, staring at nothing, the USB in his pocket. Her at the house, packing, eyes dead. Neither spoke to me. They didn't need to. The final design held, strong, unyielding, a monument to what they'd done. 5 parts left, but the weight was set. They'd carry it forever. The divorce papers hit Emily like a sledgehammer through glass. I served them at the house, a crisp morning in late summer, the air heavy with dew. She opened the envelope, hands trembling, and sank to the floor, the pages spilling around her. "Full custody?" she whispered, voice breaking. "You can't take Lily." I stood there, unmoved, my face a wall. "I can," I said. "I will." The evidence was stacked. Her absences, her lies, the footage I'd kept. Her lawyer would scramble, but I'd built this case like a fortress. She'd have nothing left to fight with. Daniel's echoes reached me too. The PI, still on retainer, reported he'd moved again, a room in a boarding house, the kind with stained carpets and shared bathrooms. He'd stopped working, started drinking more, a bottle his only companion. That USB I'd left haunted him. I saw it in the way he flinched at shadows, the way he'd scan the street. He knew someone had orchestrated his fall, but not how deep it ran. I didn't care if he figured it out. His ruin was loud enough without my name on it. Emily's family turned colder. Her sister called me once, voice sharp, demanding answers. "What did you do to her?" she asked. I told her the truth, half of it. She chose someone else. I chose myself. They didn't know the sabotage, the strings I'd pulled, but they knew her shame. Her parents stopped calling, her mother's letters stopped coming. The video I'd sent months ago still lingered, a stain they couldn't scrub. Emily was alone now, her echoes bouncing off empty walls. I moved out that week, took a small apartment near work, clean, sparse mine. Left her the house for now, knowing she'd lose it soon. The mortgage was in my name, and I'd stop paying once the courts ruled. She'd have to sell, scramble, start over with nothing. Lily called from camp, cheerful, oblivious. "When's Mommy coming?" she asked. "Soon." I lied, my chest tight. I'd shield her from this, build her a new life. Emily's ruin wouldn't touch her, not yet. The echoes were mine to hear, and I listened, satisfied. Emily fought the divorce, but her threads were thin, fraying fast. Her lawyer, a wiry woman with tired eyes, tried to spin her story. A struggling artist, a moment of weakness. I countered with dates, times, receipts, every motel stay, every call. The judge, a stern man with gray hair, barely blinked. "Infidelity's not the issue," he said. "Stability is." Lily needed stability, and I had it. Job, home, no secrets left to spill. Emily's hands shook in court, her last threads snapping one by one. Daniel's threads were gone. I drove by his boarding house once, saw him on the stoop, a cigarette dangling, eyes hollow. He tried calling her. I'd seen the logs before I cut her phone off my plan. She didn't answer. Their connection, once her escape, was a ghost now, severed by my hand. I'd mailed him one more thing. A photo of Emily at the gallery opening, smiling before it all crashed. No note, just the image. Let him remember what he'd lost, what he'd cost her. His last thread to her, to anything, burned away. She lost the house a month later. I stopped the payments, forced the sale. She moved to a rental. A cramped studio, paint peeling, far from our old life. I heard through a neighbor she'd sold her canvases cheap, trying to scrape by. Her art, her soul, reduced to garage sale scraps. I didn't gloat, not outwardly. Inside, it was a quiet triumph, a beam locking into place. She'd woven this betrayal, thread by thread, and I'd unraveled it, leaving her bare. Lily came home from camp, tanned and grinning. I picked her up, moved her into the apartment. Her room bright with posters, her laugh filling the space. "Where's Mommy?" she asked again. "She's busy," I said, softer now. I'd tell her someday, when she was older, when the truth wouldn't break her. For now, I tied the last threads of my new life. Lily, me, a future without Emily's shadow. The old one was gone, and I'd cut it clean. I rebuilt my life deliberately, piece by piece, a new structure rising from the rubble. Work steadied me, bridges, buildings, things I could trust. Lily adjusted, her school nearby, her friends filling our weekends with noise. I dated once, a quiet woman from the office, but it didn't stick. Too soon, maybe, or too hollow after Emily. The mirror of my old life was gone. But this one, smaller, simpler, reflected something solid. I didn't need her anymore. Emily's reflection faded. I heard she'd taken a job, waitressing nights, a far cry from her easels and galleries. She'd call sometimes, asking for Lily, her voice thin through the line. I let them talk, supervised, kept it short. "I miss you," she'd say, and Lily would nod, unsure. I'd end it there, no visits, no softness. The courts had ruled. Supervised contact, my terms. She'd see her daughter through my lens now, a mirror I controlled. Her betrayal had cost her that too. Daniel's mirror was black. The PI stopped tracking him, too pitiful, he said. Last sighting. A shelter downtown, unshaven. A bag of clothes his only weight. He'd called Emily one final time. A payphone number I traced. She didn't pick up. I'd made sure she couldn't, blocking it through her new, cheap plan I'd hacked. Their story ended in silence, a reflection shattered beyond repair. I'd rebuilt mine. They'd stare into theirs and see nothing. I hung a new mirror in the apartment, literal, brass-framed, above the sink. Saw myself in it, older, lines deeper but steady. Lily laughed in the background, and I smiled, small but real. Emily had cracked the old one, Daniel had helped, but this was mine. No whispers, no shadows. The rebuilt mirror held, and I stood taller in it, the past a blueprint I'd burned. I saw Emily one last time, months later, by chance. I'd taken Lily to a park, swings, ice cream, a Saturday routine. Emily was there, across the field, sitting on a bench, alone. She looked thinner, her hair dull, a coat too big for her frame. She didn't see us at first, just stared at the ground, a coffee cup cold in her hands. Lily spotted her, tugged my sleeve. "Mommy?" she asked, hopeful. I nodded, let her run over. I stayed back, watched. They talked. Lily bouncing, Emily still, her face flickering with something like light, then shadow. She hugged her, tight, too long, and I saw her shoulders shake. Lily came back, said, "Mommy's sad." I knelt, smoothed her hair. "She'll be okay," I said, not meaning it. We left, and Emily's eyes followed us. A final glimpse I didn't return. She'd built that distance. I just cemented it. Her life was hers now, small, gray, a canvas unpainted. Daniel's glimpse came later, a rumor through the PI. He'd left town, hitchhiked north, chasing work that wouldn't come. Someone said he'd asked about Emily, drunk, rambling, but no one knew where she was. He'd lost her trail, lost everything. I pictured him on some roadside, thumb out, a man erased. My last glimpse of him was imagined, and it was enough. He'd fade, a smudge on the horizon. I didn't need to see them again. Their glimpses were theirs, brief, broken, a reminder of what I'd done. Mine was forward. Lily's laugh, my work, a life I'd reclaimed. The final glimpse wasn't theirs to share. It was mine, and I turned away, the past a flicker I'd extinguished. The revenge was a monument now, towering, unyielding, carved from their ruin. Emily lived her days in that studio, serving coffee, scraping by, her art gone, her family distant, Lily a voice on a phone. Daniel drifted, a phantom in some nowhere town, his charm buried under whiskey and dust. I designed it all, every collapse, every crack, and it stood, a testament to what they dared. Not a shout, not a mess, but a quiet, cruel precision they'd never unbuild. Lily grew, taller, brighter, asking less about her mom. I told her bits, gentle ones, when she pushed. "Mommy made mistakes," I said once, and she nodded, trusting me. I kept her safe, given her a foundation Emily couldn't. The courts finalized it. Full custody, her visits rare, supervised. Emily signed the papers, defeated, her signature shaky. The house sold, profits mine, I bought a new one, bigger, ours. The monument cast its shadow, but not on us. I saw it in their absence. Emily's calls rarer, Daniel's name a whisper that died. They'd feel it forever. Her in the weight of her solitude, him in the chill of his nothing. I didn't gloat, didn't need to. The monument spoke for me. Steady, cold, a structure they'd never climb out from under. Friends asked sometimes, "You okay?" I'd smile, say, "Better than ever." They didn't know the half, didn't need to. Years later, I drove by that motel. Still there, faded, a relic of their betrayal. I didn't stop, just glanced, felt the monument hum. Lily sang in the back seat, and I turned up the radio. The past was theirs to carry. My future was here, light, mine. The story ended where I wanted, them buried under my design, me standing tall. The monument held, and I walked away, finished.